Welcome back. You're watching HFO-TV.
Please join me in welcoming Christen White.
So I have about 15 minutes to talk to you about inclusionary housing. So I'm going to try to put it in a nutshell for you and talk about the emerging issues and what the trends we see in inclusionary zoning within the city of Portland are. But before I start, can I get a quick show of hands of people who actually manage or have projects outside the Central City Plan District? Okay, and what about inside the Central City Plan District? Okay, it's roughly half and half, so I'll cover both of them. So inclusionary zoning, I'm going to cover the basics of it really quickly and then get into more of the issues that are emerging. I assume people are relatively familiar with it, but it passed in February 1st of 2017. City of Portland is the only jurisdiction in the entire state of Oregon that adopted inclusionary housing. So in terms of how it impacts the regional housing market, those burdens and restrictions only exist in the city of Portland. They don't exist in Beaverton, Vancouver, Lake Oswego, or anywhere else in the surrounding environment. The state passed, finally lifted the ban on inclusionary zoning, did not require any jurisdiction to adopt inclusionary zoning, but rather allowed them to exercise their discretion and authority to adopt a program within the parameters set out by the state. So where does it apply? It applies to every multifamily housing project with 20 or more units. Multifamily housing structure does not apply to attached townhomes, for example, but a multifamily structure in any zone within the city where you're allowed to build housing with 20 or more units. It applies both to new developments and to alterations to existing developments. So if you have an existing development and you're doing tenant improvements or you're doing an addition and you're adding 20 units, inclusionary zoning then applies to the entirety of the building. Outside the Central City Plan District and the Gateway Plan District, so two of the major plan districts, the inclusion rate is 15% of the units at 80% MFI or 8% of the units at 60% MFI. The important thing to know about this is that on January 1st, 2019, that changes. So keep in mind that people are having a hard time with that inclusion rate, producing affordable housing units outside the Central City Plan District. January 1st, 2019, if a new project isn't submitted by that date, we'll have new effective inclusion rates, which jump the 80% MFI to 20% of your units and the 60% MFI to 10% of your units. So those little margins that exist that are allowing the multifamily projects outside the Central City at lower densities to accomplish IZ are in question when these rates actually tick up. Inside the Central City, it's broken up into two different scenarios, one for projects that are below 5-to-1 floor area ratio and those that are above 5-to-1 floor area ratio. But just to put it succinctly, because we don't have much time, basically the rates currently are 20% at 80% MFI and 10% at 60% MFI. That exists now, and it will exist after January 1st, 2019. There isn't a tick up in the Central City. There are bonuses, incentive bonuses associated with these programs. There are density bonuses, property tax exemption for 10 years on the affordable units if you're below 5-to-1, on all of the units if you're above 5-to-1, waivers on your construction excise tax for your affordable units, waivers on your SDCs if you're a project of a certain density. The bottom line is those benefits and incentives at a large scale are viewed as insufficient in the development market to compensate for the costs associated with subsidizing the rents in affordable housing projects. And what I'm hearing from my clients is the primary reason for that is because of the length of affordability. You're getting a 10-year property tax exemption, in some cases just on the affordable units, and in some cases in high density on all the units, but it's only for 10 years. The length of affordability is 99 years. So there's a disparity in the length of the incentive and the length of the affordability, and basically these projects are falling off a cliff on year 11, and the politics of the matter don't seem to be resolving that. But it is one issue on everybody's radar that one way to actually build more units into our system is to fix that parity. Whether it's 20 years of a tax exemption and 20 years of affordability, you're going to get more units than the 0 you're getting now in the Central City Plan District. So keep that in mind as one of the changes that you may all want to be advocating for, or one that actually may end up making the program work, is parity in the length of affordability and the length of the bonuses. Another issue to consider with this is, especially for your market, if people can't comply with affordable housing by building the units within their project, they have the opportunity to do 3 other things. They can build those same amount of units that they're required to include in their project on another site that has certain geographic boundaries and proximity to the site that triggers the affordable housing. But they can also, and this might be important for you, they can also dedicate units within an existing apartment building. So let's say you have an existing apartment building and someone cannot pencil affordable housing inclusionary units or can't finance those units in a market rate project. They're searching around for options because they want to build that market rate project. They have 3 options: build offsite or dedicate existing units. That's where you may come in, because we have apartment complexes around the city that are in effect ghost banks for this requirement of affordable housing. Now the standards change. They're more rigorous because this isn't preferred in terms of the way to meet affordable housing, right? The preference is to integrate these units in a market rate at the time you're building the market rate. So the numbers tick up and the affordability goes down, but it is a possibility that we're going to run into more and more in the future that people can't incorporate in their own buildings, so they're looking for existing buildings to compensate for their requirement. There's also a fee in lieu, but hardly anybody's been paying the fee in lieu because it's so expensive. So the fee in lieu, for example, in like a 9-to-1 floor area ratio, so that's a high density in the central city, the fee in lieu is $29 a square foot, and that square footage calculation applies to the entire development, not just the affordable housing units, not just the market rate units, the commercial on the ground floor, the parking, everything. So you end up with a 100,000 square foot building at $29 a foot, forget about it. You can't pay the fee in lieu. So very few people are paying the fee in lieu. I think one project so far has paid the fee in lieu, and it was outside the Central City Plan District, and it was for like 2,000 square feet of FAR. So it's not something that's being used. That's exactly the way the city of Portland wanted it, because the fee in lieu just goes into this housing bank, and then they have to manage it, and they have to build a project, and they have to be audited, and they have to determine if they can actually become developers and use this fee in lieu. So it hasn't been super popular. There's a couple of other legal issues that are emerging, like the definition of site. So the multifamily IH requirement is based on your site. If your site is large and you can accommodate more than one building, then one interpretation is you could build your affordable project with all its tax credits and different incentives and different financial mechanisms, federal credits that we know are difficult to get, state credits, what have you, in one building and do your market rate in the other building. The other interpretation, which the city is more comfortable with, is no, we didn't really mean site, even though that term is well defined in the code and includes all of your contiguous ownership. We just really meant building. Well, that's not what it says. So there's a fight about that as well. It would definitely make it easier to produce more units if we went with the site definition, but this is an early program. Everybody's kind of getting their legs about them and trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work, what meets policy and doesn't meet policy. That's one of the issues. So the site definition and the parity between length of affordability and the incentives are 2 big issues. I'm going to turn really quick to the update, which is, I don't know how many of you had the opportunity to see the Tyler Bump memo from the city of Portland dated in February of 2018. It was a look back of the first year of the affordable housing program. And it nicely and diplomatically said, it's not working. Here's some of the statistics. About 18,000 units beat the clock. So what that means is about 18,000 units submitted either their building permit or their vesting land use review before February 1st, 2017, and therefore were not subject to inclusionary zoning. Of those 18,000 units, 10,000 units as of February 2018 were still in the queue and either moving towards permit approval or permits were approved and they hadn't built yet. So those are 10,000 units in projects with more than 20 units each project. Half of those are in permit review still, half have been approved. Most people think that's about 18 to 24 months of apartment supply. None of these, by the way, are condos. Of apartment supply before the projects that have to do IH come into play. So after IH, what happened? So after February 1st, so we saw that huge run to the courthouse steps, right? Get your application in. After IH, permit submittals were significantly slower, is what the report says. There were 17 projects instead of 81 projects in the first year of IH. Not one of those projects was in the Central City Plan District, not one. There hasn't been one residential permit application with 20 or more units submitted for development in the Central City Plan District since IH went into effect. That's a cliff, and unlike any previous period of time. So all of these were outside the Central City Plan District. 12 were privately financed, 5 were Portland Housing Bureau or city projects. Of the 12 that were privately financed, there were 565 market rate units in those. So what they did was yield 89 affordable housing units. The goal of the program was 1,000, right? So we're talking about a program that isn't producing what it's supposed to produce. You'd think then that we would have jumped in and pulled some levers and changed some relationships in the math so that we would generate the units that are the program's objective. We haven't done that yet. 69% of those, or 69 of the 89 units were at 80% MFI, and 20 were at 60% MFI. So we're talking about mostly 80% MFI projects and not pushing the affordability lower and lower. Every single project, again, was outside the central city, and they were mostly smaller units. Most of those units, of the 89 units, were studios or one bedrooms. So generally, there wasn't family affordable housing units being constructed. So think about this also, and I think this might be important as we move forward. At the end of the negotiations over the IH program, Commissioner Novick was still in office. And what he presented was an idea at the very end that actually did get incorporated into the program, and it was the bedroom count rule. And the bedroom count rule may be important for this whole off-site dedication of pre-existing units, and this is how the bedroom rule works. If you have a project with 100 market rate units, right, and you're going for the 10% of the units at 60% MFI, that's 10 units that you have to build. If in those 10 units, they're all one bedrooms, then really what your requirement is in that building is 10 bedrooms. What Commissioner Novick's amendment allows is that you can build those 10 bedrooms in any configuration that you want. So you could build 5 two-bedroom units instead of 10 one-bedroom units. And of course, the benefit of that is it's less kitchens, it's less bathrooms, it brings the expense of the project overall down, and the upside is these are more family-sized units. So his incentive was to incorporate more family incentives in the program, but what he did, accidentally or on purpose, is that he offered an amendment that actually allows people to bring the overall cost down. Of my clients who are trying to make this project work, our program work in the Central City Plan District, this is starting to become really essential to their pro formas to think about this bedroom count and the way to at least reduce costs around the margins by eliminating some kitchens and eliminating some bathrooms. Other people are going with lower density. So I heard Mr. Johnson speaking earlier today on a subject that's all dear to our hearts, which is urban growth boundary and overall housing supply and how this all plays together in that. And the issue here, right, is that what people are doing on properties in the Central City Plan District that have a 6-to-1 FAR, which means 6 times the development potential of the site area, right? 20,000 square foot site, 6-to-1, you could be building 120,000 square feet. They're not doing that, and they're coming in with like attached townhouse proposals, right, of 18 and 19 units, so that they avoid IZ and actually have something that works in a pro forma. Well, what is that going to do long-term to our density goals in the central city, the efficiency of our transportation and other service network, the pressure on the urban growth boundary, the expenses that come with expanding the urban growth boundary and infrastructure? These are the conversations that need to be happening, and they're not happening because it's such a politically charged environment around affordable housing. So if you're looking forward at this, I would try to get involved in the conversation if you can, and involved in the conversation around pulling and pushing levers that it's not rocket science, right? This is math. What works in your pro forma? What works in your project? What are our efficiency goals? It's not that far off, right? But we just have to be willing to say, well, maybe a project with 20 years of affordability is better than no project at all that doesn't pencil, even though the dream was 99 years of affordability, right? We need to add these units. It is the right thing to do, but the program isn't working at this point. I think I've run over my 15 minutes. Thank you.
Our entire office specializes in multifamily real estate, making HFO the largest multifamily brokerage in the Pacific Northwest. Your success is our passion. Build your legacy with HFO. Call 503-241-5541 or visit our website at hfore.com for more information.